chaos at the University of Calgary. Police move in on a pro-Palestine protest as the UN issues a dire warning about critical aid being cut off to Gaza. Also on this Friday night, forced out.
People were scrambling. They're all running out with their bags trying to save their stuff.
Why hundreds of Winnipeg residents were ordered to leave their apartment building. Hoop dreams may be coming true. The Canadian city said to be netting a WNBA team. And sounds incredible.
She was turning to really soft sounds.
The life-changing treatment for a little girl who was born deaf.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin with developments on campus encampments in Canada. We're learning tonight McGill University has filed an injunction against the pro-Palestinian encampment set up on campus. Now, it's not clear yet if that injunction will be enforced. And it's a stark contrast to what's happening in Calgary. Police there are releasing more details about the clashes that erupted at the University of Calgary campus yesterday. At least 5 people were arrested after officers in full riot gear moved in to make sure the encampment wouldn't last the night. In scenes reminiscent of those playing out on U.S. campuses, police forcibly removed anti-war demonstrators with flashbangs and tear gas 16 hours after the encampment was first erected. Heather Yourex-West is at the University of Calgary for us tonight. Heather, what's happening there now?
Well, Farah, the tents and barriers are gone, but a few hundred protesters have returned to the U of C campus undeterred after a very tense and at times violent night with police.
The encampment at the University of Calgary came weeks after other campus protests, but 24 hours after tents were erected here, everyone is gone.
I'm glad that the University of Calgary made the decision that they did.
Late Thursday, Calgary police moved in to remove the protesters by force. A Global journalist on scene observed the use of a pepper spray type substance.
Yeah, you're gonna need to cover your face.
A series of flashbangs were also deployed on the crowd.
It's really dystopian, honestly. These are halls that I've walked for so many years of my life, and I would have never expected to be pushed out of them with rubber bullets and flares.
Please refrain from throwing things.
The University of Calgary declined our request for an interview, instead posting a letter to the community online. In it, the president says the decision to enforce the university's trespass order was made by police, based on the risk to public safety as assessed by protester actions and social media monitoring.
This isn't something we enjoy doing, but it is something that is very necessary when individuals refuse to comply with lawful direction. 5 individuals were arrested under the Trespass to Premises Act. 3 of them were issued violation tickets, and all were subsequently released.
On campus at Edmonton's University of Alberta, a very different scene Friday, where a similar, though smaller, protest encampment entered its second day.
We've actually expanded to a second portion of quad, and we've been setting up our camp.
And at schools in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, protests have continued for more than a week.
Generally, occupations, the administration will let them go for a day, a couple days, but in this case, the administration really clamped down quite quickly, and I was very surprised by that.
We are asking you to move off the campus.
The U of C encampment may have been shut down quickly, but protest organizers say they're far from done.
And Farah, I'll tell you that police say that a protest like this, they're not going to interfere with this, but another encampment will not be allowed. Now, protesters are being pretty tight-lipped about their plans for tonight, although I will say there are no signs of any building materials for another encampment. They do tell me that they do plan to continue to gather in protest until there is a ceasefire. Farah?
Heather Yourex-West in Calgary. Thanks, Heather. Another strong criticism of Israel from the U.S. tonight. The White House says it has reasonable evidence to conclude Israel's use of American-supplied weapons likely violated international humanitarian law. Now, it can't determine that for certain because of lack of evidence. This comes days after President Biden threatened to pull military aid to its ally. Still today in New York, the U.S. was one of very few countries that stood with Israel against a vote to determine Palestine's UN membership.
In favor, 143. Against, 9. Abstentions, 25. Draft resolution is adopted.
The United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly backed a Palestinian bid that would enhance its rights within the organization. But despite the number of votes, it's largely seen as symbolic. The United States has made it clear it would block full Palestinian membership at the next step in the Security Council. Canada abstained from the vote.
The Israeli government under Prime Minister Netanyahu has unacceptably closed the door on any path towards a two-state solution. So Canada has decided to change our position from no at the UN to abstaining.
Hamas says ceasefire negotiations are back at square one after Israel effectively rejected a proposal by international mediators this week.
לצה"ל יש חימושים.
And the IDF reiterated it has the munitions it needs to move forward with a full-scale Rafah offensive, even with the U.S. blocking some military aid. On the ground in Gaza, Israeli tanks are said to have captured the main road dividing Rafah, effectively encircling the eastern part of the city. The UN says more than 100,000 refugees have managed to make it out, but they're deeply concerned over the lack of humanitarian aid getting in amid a spreading famine.
We are scraping the bottom of the barrel. At a time when people are being forced to pick up and move again, life-saving supplies that sustain and support them have been entirely cut off.
There was a major military commitment from Canada today to supply weapons to Ukraine. Ottawa is committing $76 million for a German-led plan for much-needed air defense systems. In recent weeks, Kyiv has been making increasingly urgent pleas for military support. In particular, it has asked for air defense systems, like the one you're looking at, to fend off Russian attacks. Today, Canada's Defense Minister Bill Blair said Canada is stepping up to help Ukraine defend itself.
President Zelensky made it very clear that Ukraine is in desperate and urgent need. I'm very pleased that Canada is able to contribute $76 million, as we've just announced, to that initiative.
The plan is to provide the air and missile defense to Ukrainian battlefields over the next few weeks. And the help is badly needed after an intense Russian bombardment on Kharkiv today. The attack involved powerful bombs, artillery, rockets, and tanks. At least 2 people were killed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the military was prepared and sent in reinforcements to help hold off a Russian advance. Residents are still being told to gather their belongings and to leave. Immigration Minister Marc Miller met with his provincial and territorial counterparts today to discuss ways to tackle the country's ballooning immigration numbers. The federal government has already taken the step of slashing the number of temporary visas by 600,000 as it tries to figure out the country's housing shortage at the same time. Mackenzie Gray joins us from Ottawa with all the details. Mackenzie.
Yeah, Farah, the Liberals are staking their electoral future on housing. They've poured in billions to try and increase supply, but they're also more quietly working to slow down demand by admitting fewer temporary residents. In the budget, the Liberals promised to cut the share of temporary residents in Canada from the current level of 6.2% of the population to 5% within the next 3 years, reversing the trend of massive increases. In 2018, 337,000 temporary foreign workers were admitted. Fast forward to 2022, and that number's nearly doubled to over 600,000.
These are volumes that, despite best efforts of federal and provincial governments, are not going to go down significantly in the near future, and we have to be prepared for the medium term and long term as a country.
Immigration Minister Marc Miller meeting with provincial counterparts today, who've routinely pushed the federal government to bring in more workers to deal with labor shortages in certain sectors. But often the newcomers don't have the skills to match where there are needs. Take construction. Despite a severe housing shortage, analysis from the Bank of Canada shows that of all the major sectors of the economy, construction has the lowest participation rate from immigrants and has barely grown since 2019, an issue Miller recognizes.
The reality we've heard from anyone in the sector is that this is an aging workforce, and we need to make it younger pretty quickly, or else all the housing plans that we have, as ambitious as they are, won't be able to get done.
These measures complement a reduction and cap on foreign student visas and proposals to make it easier to remove asylum seekers from Canada. All moves designed to try and alleviate pressure on housing and partially restructure the Canadian economy.
It's having an impact on the wages workers receive. It's having an impact on the rents that people who rent their accommodations pay. It's having an impact on the employment rate.
Those impacts are also being felt at the polls for the Liberals, down as much as 20 points to the Conservatives, leading the Prime Minister to need an immediate political fix, Farah. But housing experts say any changes the Liberals make won't have an impact on the housing market for at least 2 years.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thank you, Mackenzie. Now, against the backdrop of Canada's immigration-fueled population growth, the latest jobs numbers are out, and they're not as expected. Statistics Canada says the economy created 90,000 positions in April, much more than the roughly 20,000 analysts anticipated. It's the largest monthly increase since January of 2023. Most jobs were concentrated in part-time work, with gains driven by professional, scientific, and technical services. The unemployment rate stayed flat at 6.1%. And the Bank of Canada is watching the labour market, particularly the pace of wage growth, closely ahead of its next interest rate decision on June 5th. More than 200 people living in a Winnipeg apartment building are out of their homes tonight. The building has been deemed unsafe and it could collapse. Tenants were given just hours to leave. Melissa Ridgen was there as the news was delivered.
It was a scene of confusion and anger.
I'm trying to find out where we should go because we have no other place to stay in. We are newcomers to Canada, so we pay here rent fee. We have 2 dogs, we have 2 cars, and now we have to evacuate out of the blue. So we don't understand where shall we go.
Throughout the night, city officials made their way through this 170-unit building, saying it's unsafe and must be vacant by morning. The building operators say a column in the underground parkade was damaged weeks ago, setting off a series of engineering inspections throughout the building that found more serious problems. And ultimately, bad news from engineers.
Have you thought about what if this wasn't found?
I will say I am very happy that we found this. Like, it is this is gut-wrenching for everybody. I am very happy we found this.
The city set up a reception room at a nearby hotel to assist tenants.
Some people are just packing like they're going for the weekend, like they don't really realize, how serious the situation is. And there's people wandering around like elderly, like they're confused, they're asking, other people, like I don't think they have help. There's other people that are bringing in U-Hauls.
It made for a chaotic Friday morning as folks grabbed what they could and left.
What the hell do I do? I just got home from work. I have 2 cats. I have 30 plus fish. I have a Mustang to move everything in.
Scrambling to help her mother, Tammy Blythe is critical of the building owners for not giving folks more notice when they received that engineering letter earlier in the week. It will be weeks before the fate of the building is known. In the meantime, people living on a block of houses behind the apartment have been notified they too could be ordered to vacate if further inspection shows the building is an imminent threat. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
A life-altering treatment.
Mommy kiss?
Coming up, the groundbreaking procedure that restored near-perfect hearing for a British toddler. Playtime and storytime are taking on a whole new meaning for one British toddler. Born deaf, Opal Sandy can now hear almost perfectly. She's the first British patient and the youngest child in the world to be treated with a breakthrough gene therapy. As Crystal Gamansing reports, there are high hopes the promising results can help others with severe hearing loss.
Can I have a kiss? Oh, good girl.
A bid for love answered by little Opal Sandy. Before doctors at Cambridge University Hospital injected her right ear with a modified virus containing a synthetic protein, Opal would not have heard the request from her mom.
So one thing that we've been really excited about here is that we've been able to use a really small dose of gene therapy delivered directly to the cochlea. And what that means is that we're not delivering a large dose of gene therapy to the rest of the body. And then, so it means that we see fewer side effects.
Targeted gene therapy is being tested on children like Opal. She was born with auditory neuropathy, which can be the result of the OTOF gene missing a protein called autoferlin. The infusion delivered a copy of that protein and appears to have corrected the fault, allowing the tiny hair cells deep in the inner ear to communicate with the auditory nerve, sending signals to the brain.
That was 24 weeks post-surgery, and we heard the phrase near normal hearing.
They played us the sounds that she was turning to, and we were quite mind blown by how soft it was, how quiet it was.
We can start to use gene therapy in young children, restore hearing for a variety of different kinds of genetic hearing loss, and then have a more one and done type approach.
Early results in the multi-phase trial involving Opal and a second participant were presented at the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy's annual conference. More children in the UK, Spain, and the US are being added to the trial, and participants will be followed for 5 years.
We'd been given a really unique opportunity with no real evidence that any harm or adverse effects to potentially make obstacles easier for her to overcome was a risk definitely worth taking.
Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
The blunt words of Rex Murphy. Next, how the Canadian commentator is being remembered. Tributes have been pouring in for longtime national commentator Rex Murphy. He died yesterday from cancer at the age of 77. Over the decades, the Newfoundland-born TV personality and newspaper columnist was known for his sharp wit and even sharper tongue. Unafraid to speak his mind, even as his views became increasingly polarizing and controversial. Here's Heidi Petrachik.
Few gifts from The Rock rival that of the now departed Rex Murphy.
Rex Murphy's passing was acknowledged in Parliament Friday, a place so often his target.
Deeper than name or fame, deeper than looks or locks.
Born in a small community in Newfoundland and Labrador before it had even joined Canada, Robert Rex Raphael Murphy studied as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford in the late 60s, then came back home for a career in media.
I grew up next to a radio station in St. John's called VOCM, and Rex worked with Dad on the radio station.
And what comedian Mark Critch always remembers.
He had a way with words like no one else. In a province known for great talkers, he was our greatest.
Let's talk.
His more than 2 decades with CBC included helming its countrywide call-in show, then moving to TV with his pointed opinion segments.
How did Donald Trump get where he is? He's rich, but that doesn't explain it. Bill Gates is a lot richer, and he's still sane.
He had opinions about things that it seemed never to be really on party lines. It was more about what he thought was best for the country, and he had very strong principled views about that.
Murphy's work as a newspaper columnist and public speaker kept him in the public eye after he left CBC, but in recent years sparked backlash. His polarizing views on climate change, the Trudeau government, and so-called wokeism unpopular. A 2020 column claiming, quote, Canada is not a racist country, caused uproar, and the publisher apologized.
He didn't change the way he was and didn't change the way he spoke and didn't change his priorities, even as the rest of the world around him was moving to different spaces.
I'd like to spread some reason here.
Murphy kept on writing and speaking his mind even after his cancer diagnosis. A career commentator at times both liked and disliked, but always outspoken and unapologetic. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
Good news for women's basketball coming up. A Canadian city that could court a WNBA expansion. There were no first game jitters for basketball phenom Caitlin Clark. She scored 12 points in her WNBA preseason debut in Indianapolis. Her team went on to win with over 13,000 people in the stands. That's triple the average crowd from last season. Clark ended her college career just last month, finishing as the top scorer in history. Multiple reports tonight suggest the WNBA is looking to expand with a new team and is setting its sights on Toronto for 2026. Not only could that be big news for Canadian fans of women's basketball, it proves the sport's popularity is skyrocketing. Mike Drolet explains.
The WNBA planted the seeds of expansion talk a few weeks ago.
We continue to engage with cities like Philadelphia and Toronto.
And now, multiple reports point to the league soaring to new heights, or rather, soaring north of the border, to Toronto, in Canadian basketball star Kayla Alexander's backyard.
I've never had the opportunity to play a professional basketball game in my country. For the last 11 years I've been playing pro, I've always had to leave. So I'm so excited for this next generation that if they decide that they want to play basketball in Canada, they have this opportunity now. I think it's incredible. I'm so excited.
The WNBA has struggled to draw an audience at times since its inception 28 years ago.
Damn, the WNBA really needs to start giving out tickets.
But women's sports in general are having a moment. The PWHL far exceeded all expectations in its inaugural year, and everything appears to be trending up with the WNBA, which drew an average of 6,600 fans last year, its highest number since 2018. Viewership in the U.S. also rose 21% over the previous year, but perhaps the most important barometer, the league set new highs for its digital platforms, social media, and sports betting. And that's without Caitlin Clark, who was just drafted into the league and is drawing more attention than her male peers.
I think it shows that in a lot of ways, women's basketball, women's sport is a moneymaker now. And it wasn't, as you said, it wasn't the case maybe 10, 15, even 5 years ago. And it's now a business model that can thrive.
With Aaliyah Edwards, who was also drafted into the WNBA this year, there are now 5 Canadians in the league, with more on the way. A veritable slam dunk for Canadian hoops. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and tonight's Your Canada is Fredericton, where these fiddleheads are a sure sign of spring. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.